On October 13th, 2011, Michele Williams called 911 around 4:30 a.m. The operator could barely understand what the woman was saying. She was so hysterical.
911, where is the emergency? Oh my God,
When the operator was finally able to get some words out of Michele, she reported that her husband, Greg Williams, had just been shot. According to Michele, an intruder shot Greg, and the intruder was still in their home. The Keller police received the 911 dispatch around 4:40 a.m. and rushed to the Williams. However, it was too late. Greg Williams had died from a gunshot to the head. Michele was sporting a large bruise on the right side of her face. The intruder had hit her, she said. Their 4-year-old daughter had been asleep on the couch. However, later that day, during the interview, Michele changed her story. There was no intruder, and her husband was not killed. He had committed suicide.
He did it and you covered it up. Just tell me.
He did.
Huh?
He did.
She also admitted to cleaning up the crime scene before calling for help. The more Michele spoke, the more the details of her story changed, and the more investigators suspected her. Her actions after the death of her husband worsened the credibility of her story. Was Greg Williams killed, or did he commit suicide? Why would Michele clean up the crime scene? Was the hysterical widow on the phone a black widow in disguise? According to public opinion, Keller is one of Texas's best places to live. With a population of less than 50,000, according to the 2020 census, the city offers residents a suburban, homely feeling. Keller is primarily residential, with most members owning their own homes. It features 11 park sites and more than 26 miles of hiking and biking trails. The city prides itself on being Texas's most family-friendly city. It was quite a shock when news went around that a wife was a suspect in her husband's murder, and she did it with their child in the house. It was not family-friendly, but it happened in Keller. Michele was born and raised in Hurst, Texas. She lived with her sister Laura and their father. Their mother was said to have abandoned the family in search of greener pastures. Their father turned to alcohol, but when he could, he worked as a handyman and did odd jobs on construction sites as a secondary source of income. However, members of the Hearst community remembered him as quite the con artist. Michele's father purposely got into accidents at work and threatened to sue his employers. Sometimes, he jumped in front of company vehicles and asked for compensation to avoid a lawsuit. He always got paid and never had to file any lawsuit. But before long, the news traveled through Hearst, and his tricks became popular, expected, and ultimately began to fail. Michele seemed to follow in her father's footsteps. Old friends and classmates described her as a good liar, manipulator, and cheater. Michele grew up to be an attractive young woman. She attended L.D. Bill High School in Hurst, Texas, and was quite popular with the boys. By 16, Michele got pregnant with her first child. She claimed the father of her child was her 15-year-old boyfriend, Kenneth O'Brien. Kenneth did not mind. She had a boy, and a year later, the couple got married. After tying the knot at 17, Michele dropped out of high school to focus on her new family. Kenneth took on the husband and father role well and provided for his wife and child. Soon, he joined the military, and his various deployments caused his family to move around a lot. Michele was married to Kenneth for 5 years before she left him. At the time, the family was stationed in Germany, and the O'Briens now had 3 children. Michele moved back to Hearst with 3 young children. She told her family that her marriage had ended on account of abuse and infidelity. Back in Hearst, Michele reconnected with an old boyfriend, Brandon Dixon. They were no longer than kids they were, but Brandon's feelings had not changed. He was still in love with Michele. The two began seeing each other again, and Brandon did not mind Michele having kids. He still wanted to marry her. The wedding planning began, and just before they married, Brandon discovered that Michele was still legally married to Kenneth. Brandon was furious that his soon-to-be wife had lied to him. Michele revealed that her husband had abused her and cheated on her. She was embarrassed to tell Brandon and scared to serve Kenneth the divorce papers. Brandon quickly helped Michele sort out the legal issues of her previous marriage so they could begin their happily ever after. What Brandon did not know was that there was no abuse. In fact, Kenneth never cheated on Michele. It was the other way around, and the cheating was not a one-time thing. She would cheat on Kenneth too, but until the truth was revealed, Kenneth would continue to adore Michele. They got married in 1994, and things seemed to be going well. Kenneth owned an IT company and was self-employed. Michele changed jobs a lot, but finally settled on working as a dental assistant. Soon, Michele started bringing a lot of dental equipment home, but Brandon didn't think much of it. His and the kids' teeth remained clean. Eventually, Michele got fired for theft at the dental clinic and escaped getting arrested by a hair's breadth. She soon got another job as a nighttime telemarketer. Michele started returning home from work with a lot of money in her purse. Brandon got suspicious and asked his wife for her work number in case he or the kids had to contact her. Michele must have not imagined that her husband would call or show up at her workplace. So she gave him an actual number. Brandon called one night, and it turns out that his wife's telemarketing company was a topless bar. He immediately stormed it and threatened to leave her. Michele quit on the spot. That left a massive hole of mistrust in their marriage, and it only got bigger. Neighbors started reporting the fleet of cars that came by the house whenever Brandon was at work. Brandon did not trust his wife, so he secretly set up audio recorders using his IT knowledge in their home. Within a day, he heard Michele cheat on him with 2 different men. Brandon immediately confronted her and demanded a divorce. Michele couldn't deny cheating on her second husband, and she didn't seem sorry for cheating either. Instead, she was furious and sought to hurt her soon-to-be ex-husband by hurting the things he loved. Brandon owned a saltwater fish tank that housed fish worth thousands of dollars. While he was at work, Michele killed the fish with Comet, a household cleaning product. She didn't stop there. Brandon also had a dog, a Dalmatian mix called Domino. Michele gave Domino an overdose of sleeping pills. Domino got really sick and ended up passing away. After Brandon and Michele's marriage finally ended, she went back to another one of her old boyfriends, John Paul Ray. The twist in their story is that John is the father of Michele's first child. The one she had back in high school at 16. The one that resulted in her getting married to Kenneth. The biological father of that child was John Paul Ray. For some reason, she chose Kenneth as the baby's father, and he paid child support until the boy turned 18. Michele and John moved in together through a common-law marriage for 8 years. According to John, Michele had always wanted a better life and did not appreciate surviving on a paycheck. She found the life she had always sought when she met Greg Williams. John was suspicious that Michele might be cheating on him, and his suspicions were confirmed when he went through her purse. He found receipts for a dog collar, whipped cream, and cherries. He also came across a to-do list that mentioned buying a birthday card for someone named Greg. After confirming that the infamous Greg was really her lover, John moved out of their home, leaving a lot of his belongings behind. He returned to pick up his things one day, but a garage sale was happening on his property. Michele was selling off his tools and clothing. Before Greg met Michele, he had already been married twice. He had one daughter, Taylor, with his first wife, Kathy. Their divorce was amicable. Greg's lawyers drew up the papers, and the couple decided to share custody of their daughter, Taylor. They did not even have a formal child support arrangement. Kathy did not see the need to. Greg was a responsible man. So in 2003, their divorce was finalized, and both parties remained friends. The same could not be said about Kathy and Michele. Kathy always felt like Michele was a fake, and it didn't help that she was always telling lies. Greg's computer company, DFW IT Pro, had already taken off when he started seeing Michele. He was doing so well for himself that he paid for Michele's breast implants. They got married in 2007.
Greg treated me like a queen. He was the most amazing father to Michele.
They rented a $500,000 suburban Twin Lakes home equipped with a pool. They employed a maid and a nanny to care for their daughter, Michaela. The couple owned 2 Mercedes, and due to the success of DFW IT Pro, Greg was able to invest in several other businesses. He owned Blueberries, a frozen yogurt shop in Keller where Michele worked, and a weight training gym. Michele and Greg were just days away from closing on a $4.5 million home in Keller when he died. While they look like the all-American couple with their cover-worthy home and adorable toddler, their story said otherwise. Greg and Michele met on an online community for bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism. It did not matter how they met or how many children they had. They were determined to make their third marriage work. They hosted all of their children's and stepchildren's birthday parties in their home. Michele's 3 adult children frequently threw pool parties and barbecues in their stepfather's house. All these parties got the Williams multiple complaints from the Twin Lakes Homeowner Association, but Greg was going to keep the tradition they started. He valued family very highly because he didn't have an easy childhood. He grew up with an abusive father. Michele and Taylor got along well in the beginning. Michele used to take Taylor shopping. They would go on movie dates, and Taylor had even tagged along on a cruise to Mexico. During the summer of 2010, Taylor began spending weekdays with her dads and weekends with her mom. That was more time than usual, and Michele and 12-year-old Taylor soon started butting heads. Michele began accusing the 12-year-old of being addicted to prescription drugs. Taylor had never gotten into serious trouble, so her parents found it hard to believe she had a drug problem. One time, Michele had overdosed on drugs, and she claimed Taylor had slipped the prescription painkillers in her coffee. Kathy believed Michele had poisoned herself, but there was no way to prove it. Michele spent 2 days at Baylor Grapevine Hospital for benzodiazepine opiate ingestion, and Greg sent Taylor to a drug rehab facility. There was no proof, but she was labeled a drug abuser in order to undergo therapy. After that incident, Kathy stopped her daughter from spending the night at her father's. One would expect that this would drive Greg, his ex-wife, and his daughter apart, but according to Kathy, it only made them closer. The night before Greg died, He and Michele had taken little Michaela to see stepsister Taylor's choir concert. The night went well. Greg videotaped the show and kissed Taylor goodbye after the performance. The family of three grabbed dinner at Taco Bueno before heading home to Twin Lakes. The couple was closing on a $4.5 million home in Keller the very next day. They spent the rest of the night discussing the details. Around 4 a.m., Michele called 911. Someone had broken into their home and shot her husband. When police arrived, Michele was outside the house, crying and screaming as she spoke to someone on her cell phone. One officer noted how bizarre he found it that she was fully dressed with makeup on. The woman was even wearing her bra, which he believed women did not wear when they went to bed. Michele explained to the officers that she had been sleeping on the living room sofa with their daughter Michaela. A loud noise woke her, and she immediately ran to the master bedroom.
I hear an echoing sound that wakes me up. I walked to the bedroom, and all of a sudden, I get hit. Greg's in bed, and I realized, oh my God, he's been shot.
As she entered the bedroom, something hit her on the face, and she fell unconscious to the floor. When she regained consciousness, she saw her husband lying in bed with a gunshot to the head. She informed them that her daughter was still on the sofa, and the intruder ran out the back door. 3 officers went into the house. They found Greg in the master bedroom. He was under the covers with blood on his head and the floor. The bedroom television was turned up so loudly that the officers did not bother to speak to each other. They found a gun, shell casings, and a large wrench by the back door of the master bedroom. The officers also searched the backyard to ensure no one was still there. There was no evidence of an intruder in the backyard. After confirming that the intruder was no longer on the property, Michele and Michaela went with an ambulance. Michele was given an ice pack for her bruise. One of the officers found a flathead screwdriver by the backyard fence. He had also noticed scratches by the master bedroom's back door. He assumed this tool had been used to break into the house. This did not make sense, however, because the doorknob and deadbolt were still functional. This indicated that trying to break in had not worked for the intruder. He also found a bottle of Clorox wipes that he believed was used to alter the scene. The police found Michele's story hard to believe. There was no sign of forced entry, no DNA found, and nothing was stolen from the house. The deceased had 12,000 pounds in cash in the house, and a penny was not missing. Canine officers had also responded to the scene, but there was no evidence of an intruder. The couple lived in a gated community with surveillance cameras. The cameras showed only one person, the newspaper delivery man, entering the Williams home. Police officers went door to door, hoping someone had seen or heard something, but there was no information on the intruder. Sergeant John McGrew asked Michele to accompany him to the station for an interview. She cooperated and went to the station with Sergeant McGrew and Officer Todd. The interview process was explained to Michele, and as a protocol, Michele's clothes were collected for evidence, and her hands were swabbed for gun residue. Michele's interview went on for 5 hours, and at that time, she changed her initial story and even admitted to tampering with the crime scene. The sergeant then asked her to write her statement, which read, "I went to sleep at 1 a.m. and Greg was still awake. He just took at least 3 Tylenol p.m. About 3 a.m., Michaela came to our room. I got up and lay down on the couch with her. Greg was still awake. I asked him if he needed anything, and he said just to be left alone. I don't feel good. I fell asleep on the couch with Michele and was awakened by a gunshot sound after 4 a.m. I ran to the bedroom and saw Greg had shot himself in the head. I panicked and wanted to protect Michele from ever knowing her daddy killed himself and started to clean things up. First, I wiped his right hand with Clorox wipes and dried it with a blanket and toilet paper. Then, wiped the gun with the blanket and toilet paper and moved the gun to the floor by the back door, opened the back door, and called 911, hoping to save his life and make it appear as burglary. Then, I went to the laundry room, got a screwdriver, and pried a little on the back door by my office, and left it ajar. Then I grabbed the wrench, which was in the laundry room, and hit my right cheek to bruise it, so it would appear as if I startled the burglar. I dropped it by the door in the bedroom, and tossed the screwdriver out of the door by the woodpile. I flushed all the toilet paper and Clorox wipes down the toilet. This entire time, Michele was still asleep. I didn't want his children to ever know he killed himself. This was not the strangest part of Greg's death. Michele seemed to have forgotten her grief. The police released her later in the day, and Michele went straight to a restaurant to get herself a big fry-up breakfast. She then called her 2 oldest sons, Andrew and Leo Bryan, and broke the news to them. Her sons rushed to the house to comfort and help their mother. On the other hand, Michele never reached out to Greg's family. Greg's mother said she kept thinking that Michele would call her to tell her what had happened to her son, but she never did. Gregory's mother and the rest of his family waited to see what arrangements Michele would make for her late husband's funeral services, but they heard nothing from her. So they went ahead and arranged funeral services on their own. Michele did not attend the funeral. When Greg's family and friends were interviewed, they all insisted that he would never commit suicide. Greg's best friend, Bryn Fletcher, had committed suicide in 2010, and Greg was furious about it. He always said that suicide was cowardly and he would never do that to his family. Greg's mother also mentioned how Greg was excited about their new house and planned to design an aquarium and swimming pool just for Michele. Greg could not have committed suicide.
He was very happy and bubbly and telling me all about the plans he had for the new house they were buying.
In the weeks following Greg's suicide, Michele sold their frozen yogurt shop. She also sold Greg's computer company and started cashing in the checks. Greg had 3 separate life insurance policies. One was a $150,000 policy with Gerber Life Insurance Company, acquired in August 2011, with Michele as the beneficiary. The second was another $150,000 with the Garden Life Insurance Company, acquired in May 2008, with Michele named as the beneficiary. The third was a $500,000 policy with Pavonia, acquired in January 2009, with Michele as the beneficiary. All 3 policies had a 2-year suicide clause. This clause prevents the beneficiaries from accessing the payments if the insured individual committed suicide 2 years after obtaining the policy. Michele tried to access the $150,000 insurance payment that benefits Michele. She identified Greg's cause of death as stated as homicide. The insurance clerk contacted the police after Michele showed up, and the detectives began to gather evidence to strengthen Greg's case against her. Detectives began to work on proving or disproving Michele's suicide claim. A DNA analyst examined the gun found at the scene for blood blowback. The blood blowback is the blood that spatters when a person is shot from a close range. The analyst tested the gun's barrel inside, outside, and frame. The tests came back negative. Jamie Becker, a firearm examiner, also found no gunshot residue on Greg's comforter or blanket. Becker, however, found some residue on his pillowcase, but there was no evidence of shooting. Finally, after checking for stippling patterns, Becker concluded that the gun muzzle was further than 6 inches but closer than 24 inches when fired.
So beyond 6 inches and less than 24 inches.
A trace examiner found gunshot residue on Michelle's jacket, which indicates that she was close to the gun when it was fired, wiped the gun on her jacket, or fired the gun. On November 3, 2011, medical examiners ruled Greg Williams' death as homicide. On January 9, 2012, Michele was arrested for her husband's murder. She also faced additional charges of making a false report and tampering with evidence. Michele had to stay with her family. Her bond was set at $522,000, but she spent just over a week in jail before making bail at the reduced price of $85,000 on January 17, 2012. Michele walked out of jail with a GPS monitor on the arm of attorney Kenneth Winkern. Her late husband's company lawyer, who was now officially representing her. After Michele got out of jail and realized Greg's insurance was out of the question, she changed her name. Keller's Black Widow Michele Williams became Michele Williams, a fitness guru and single mom. Shelley went on Facebook to announce her relationship with Gene Wallace. Gene used to be Michelle's oldest son, Lee's friend. Gene and Shelley opened a kettlebell fitness business and began promoting it online. On October 9, 2013, Michele reached a plea deal with the county and is expected to face 18 years in prison for tampering with evidence and deadly conduct, a third-degree felony that exists in only a few states. Even though Michele admitted she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the lack of DNA at the crime scene created doubts that a first-degree murder charge would stick. Michele told the court that she was pregnant with twins, so her sentencing was delayed until her due date. She was to be sentenced on April 21, 2014. In January 2014, Michele admitted that she was no longer pregnant and was placed in jail. On February 5, 2014, Michele claimed to be innocent on television. 2 days later, prosecutors motioned to back out of the plea deal. The judge rules in favor of the prosecution. Michele's trial began on September 23, 2012. She was already known as the Keller Black Widow, and her boyfriend Gene had already proposed. The prosecution's first witness was Michelle's son, Andrew. Michele still believed that her ex-husbands had all cheated on her, but Andrew remembered it differently. Andrew testified that his mother had asked him to help frame Kathy, Greg's ex-wife, for his murder. According to him, his mother's plan was for him to buy a sweater and fire a pistol through it in the desert. She wanted to get gunpowder residue on the shirt so they could plant it under the seat of Kathy's car. Afterward, he was supposed to use a payphone to call 911 and leave an anonymous tip so that the police would reach Kathy Williams' car and find the sweater. Andrew clarified that this was the day Greg died, and he thought his mother was losing her mind to grief. He recounted the times she would randomly cry and scream. Other times, she was happy. Andrew promised Michele that he would help her, but he did nothing. When he realized that his mother might be actually serious was when she tried to frame her own son, his brother, Lee. Andrew reached out to the police at this point because he was scared his mother might hurt him and his brother one day. Michelle's son Lee would also testify that his mother had taken off her ankle monitor to go on a beach vacation. Michele also returned to working in a topless bar, so she kept her monitor in her purse while working. Michelle's older sister Laura also testified against her. She told the court that Michele was not friends with the truth and that her twin pregnancy was not the first one she had faked. The prosecution dug up the couple's financial reports. Michele had been in charge of their finances, and something was not adding up. Greg had deposited down payments for what would have been their new home, but the account only had $1,000 in it. Another report showed that all the accounts owned by the couple had roughly $28,000 in total at the time of her husband's death. This seemed ridiculous because Greg was doing well in 2011 and planning to close a $4.5 million house deal in a day. Michele must have mismanaged about £55,000. The prosecutor alleged that Greg found all this out and must have threatened to divorce Michele. Michele must have drugged Greg and shot him in his sleep. As for the bruise on her face, she indeed hit herself to make her intruder story more believable. The defense did not make much of a counter-argument. They stuck to all the alleged suicide story and tried to paint Michele as an overwhelmed mother who wanted to protect her daughter. The defense did not bring a witness to the trial, and neither did Michele stand in her own defense. She claimed to have told the police everything she knew. The jury of 7 men and 5 women contemplated for 7 hours before returning with a guilty verdict. On September 29, 2014, 45-year-old Michele was sentenced to 60 years in prison for murder and another 10 years for tampering with evidence. She would not be granted a parole hearing till 2074. Michaela stays with family and is allowed to visit her mother in prison for as long as she wants. Her sons, on the other hand, have written their mother off. She ruins lives and they are done with her. Greg's sister, Michele Fletcher, lost her husband Brent Fletcher 10 months before she lost her brother. She thinks the coincidences were not just coincidences. Bryn, who worked for Greg, was found dead with a gunshot to the head in the company car. According to Michele Fletcher, Michele Williams had given Bryn directions that day. His death was ruled a suicide by the police, and Michele Fletcher disagreed. Michele Williams had been so helpful at the time. She spoke with the authorities concerning everything. She asked that her sister-in-law be left to grieve. Michele had Bryn cremated the very next day. Family members also noted that Michele had called them the day Bryn died to say that she was shopping at Target. They now believe she was trying to set up an alibi. Unfortunately, Bryn's case has been closed, and police have announced that it will not be reopened. Aside from not having a body to examine, the reports from the ME and the police are different. The ME reports that Bryn shot himself between the eyes, while the police noted that the shot was on the right side of his head. Bryn was left-handed. Michele Fletcher might never know the cause of her husband's death, but at least her brother got justice. What are your thoughts on Michele Williams' case? What's your theory? Why did she do it? Do you think Michele Williams also killed Bryn Fletcher? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We would love to hear from you. If there is a case you would like us to cover, don't hesitate to drop your recommendations in the comment section below. For more captivating true crime stories, like, share, and subscribe to our channel.